Well, welcome back to the Friday Council for episode 5. My name's Nav, and here with Daniel
Yo, what's up?
and David.
Yoza.
And Daniel, what were you going to springboard off today?
Well, I think we were going to talk fear/anxiety, but I thought a good starting point would be where we think, anyway, fear comes from, probably on an evolutionary or human history scale. It could be a good place to start off. I heard that our only two real fears were falling. The only two fears that we're born with are falling and loud noises, and everything else was learned. But as we were discussing just before we hit record, sounds a bit sus, but we also think, no, I won't speak for all of us, I also think that it could be possible that all fear could be boiled down to a fear of death. And evolutionarily speaking, falling and loud noises, I think, pretty good signifiers of death inbound.
When you say like fear of falling, it just makes me think of you have those dreams like
Yeah.
where you're just falling, you get that shake at the end. It's like,
Yeah.
what's going on here?
That is very strange.
Yeah.
But I like that.
noises.
I'm not fearful of those. They're great. They feel like I'm on a roller coaster.
They just keep you on your toes.
Yeah. It's a dream roller coaster. They're epic.
Oh, that's an interesting one. Fear of falling and fear of loud noises.
Yeah.
That
They
we-
seem to be
that
the
we-
two fears that babies are born with, apparently. And the
Okay.
only two.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know if I necessarily
I'm
agree.
just thinking right off the bat, I've noticed this because I've got a bunch of nieces and nephews, and nearly all of them were scared of me. And like, I know it sounds funny, but I think it's the facial hair. I
Yeah.
think they
Yeah,
look,
you
look,
think you might
look-
be right,
yeah,
actually. It's
look
the
at
same
me
with-
like, whoa,
yeah.
this guy is like a predator. Like not sexual predator, but like a
Yeah.
you know, like this
You
is
look like
a
a
threat.
lion. You got a lion's
yeah,
mane.
Yeah.
look like a a threat. Like this is some dude from another tribe coming. Yeah, they were all scared of me. I think nearly all of them were scared of me when they were very young. Not anymore.
Very young.
Do you think
yeah.
it's possibly like a curiosity thing?
Yeah. It could be a fear of just something new, a new thing.
I just think it's
you were
like
there.
an instinctual thing. Like that looks like a threat.
Yeah.
Like a bit of a caveman.
Yeah, like it looks like. So I think there's like an instinctual thing there, like man, like scary looking,
Strange man.
Yeah, strange man looks like danger,
Yeah.
and just as more of a generalization as well. I think children instinctively are drawn towards women as like because it's again just I think there's an instinctual thing where women don't pose a threat.
Yeah.
That
makes
so
sense.
I think there's something there where fear goes a bit deeper than just a fear of falling and
Yes.
noise. I think there's an instinctual thing where men in general and men of certain characteristics even more so are a threat, and they can pick up on that, or a potential threat.
Yeah. Do we think, or can we think of any examples where this wouldn't be true, but that all fears can essentially be boiled down to a fear of death? So I was thinking the fear of being left out or being unpopular socially means you're left alone,
Exactly.
which basically means death.
Yep.
With an evolutionary mind, you
It's
don't
kind of
wanna
like
be alone.
the far end of the spectrum. Like what
Yeah.
you're saying. There will be smaller fears, but fear on top of fear on top of fear
Yeah. But
ultimately leads to death.
death, you might be able to sum it up. Yeah. Like if I also thought of an example of fear of losing your job, which means no money essentially, which
food.
means
I think-
you can be excluded socially
I think
with
there's
no money,
definitely
and then you
something
can
to that,
die. Yeah, or you feel danger or feel fear. I think that checks out. I can't think of any fears that aren't related to your living, your life. Even the fear of spiders is like
I
a
was thinking
cliche
spiders
one.
one,
That's
yeah.
to do with death.
Yeah,
Obviously.
well, one bad bite away from poisonous death.
Yeah.
That's an interesting one.
I think fear can also be a good teacher. We always talk about like a reframing, how you can turn something negative into a positive just from the way you see the world. And fear, I think, can be a teacher, or at least show you where you need to improve often. Of a little bit sucked down the rabbit hole of the the YouTube rabbit hole of the food shortage inbound and economic collapse inbound and all that. We may have all come across that or know of the content that's circulating, which is obviously fear-based content, but it also kind of spurs me along and shows me, okay, I need to sort out my finances, or I need to sort out my survival skills.
And in terms of like societal fear, I think we can see that through like the media, fear drives an audience or drives clicks or however you want to look at it. So often you'll find if you're just looking at the news from just wanting to find the news, for example, most stories are probably negative because it just drives more of an audience.
Yeah, I think that ties back into like humans react more strongly to negativity because, again, I think, it's we're hardwired to it's negative, that poses a threat to my life.
Yeah. I think that relates to fear stemming from your amygdala. You're supposed to, it's like basically your reptile brain, your simple brain, and then you can often combat fear using your rationality and logic, which is your prefrontal cortex. And so the constant, the 24 hours all access to news, mostly bad, whether it's designed that way or not, doesn't give you time to process it, bring it to the front of your brain, process it rationally, when there's constant news cycles of bad things. And there do seem to be pretty obvious themes on like a year-to-year scale, as we recently have obviously had a fear-based media it's been very explicit for the last 2 years, but going on to this day, there's still, you can think of any main news story and it's probably fear related.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
which is directly relevant today,
back,
obviously.
Without going into it too much, where we've just passed the year anniversary of 9/11, so that's a big one. It generates fear. I think, what have we had recently? We've obviously had the pandemic. We're talking about now food shortages,
food shortages,
war in
economic
Ukraine
collapse.
and Russia. Yep. Global financial crisis.
Big in the news was essentially fear of your rights being taken away. Either way.
Yeah, that's true.
Fear of.
That's an interesting one because I think fear is pretty broad general concept. So obviously you can limit it down to certain things. Like if you're talking about like a job, for example, I guess. Yeah, the fear of like not being able to provide for your family or for your children, or just thinking in terms of like religion, for example, because it's quite a big. I don't know about Islam or Buddhism, but in like Christianity, there's a lot of talk about fear in the Bible. And I guess sort of meditative scripture of how to deal with that. We're going to go into that later, but what would you say are like things that you'd probably use to limit fear or to conquer fear?
Are you implying that religion, or religion?
Well, just in general, first and foremost.
Okay.
Like it could be like self-talk, or like, if you're trying to hype yourself up before doing something new.
Yeah. It's got to be thinking things through really boringly and rationally. That's, you can, sometimes it doesn't help. Sometimes your fear overpowers and it's irrational. And most people's fears are probably. Do
you think it's more of like a protective thing? So like you're trying to stop yourself from harm or from hurt? Or...
I think it's probably mostly social harm.
I think that's exactly what fear's purpose is to protect you. But I think the problem is, like what you're saying, is fear, the part of our brain that makes us feel fear, is very old. It's not designed for the modern world, so it still works the same way it worked 100,000 years ago. But in general, the threats are no longer the same, but you still feel them just as though it was like a lion in the bush, or a tribe, a pack of Vikings coming to overtake you. About simple everyday things like a job interview or talking to a girl or whatever. You still, it feels like,
I think
it's taps into the same thing.
Yeah, I think it's conditioned as well. So it's like your, I I think it's like your immune system. When everything's sterilized, if you live in a super sterilized environment like we all do for our whole lives, then a small virus or a small attack on your immune system compared to what you've had your whole life destroys you. Whereas that's why kids are encouraged, or it's fine to eat dirt because it's building up, and kids are encouraged to go around each other, so their immune system isn't like immediately sensitive to an attack on it. And I think we're essentially sanitized in a relating to fear. We live a very sanitized, safe, unfearful, relatively lifestyle. So I think we're hypersensitive to it now because we don't experience it, or our fear mechanism's super sensitive and it's triggered by ridiculous tiny things.
Yeah. I think do you think maybe like there's a difference between full irrational fear and just general fear? And
No, I don't think so. I think it's the same thing.
This just reminds me, there was someone at high school who, I can't remember his name, but anyway, yeah, he was quite a germaphobe, and it seemed like wait, we might have to edit that one out. Well, we won't edit that one out, but yeah, he just, every time something touched him, he'd have to go to the bathroom to like wash his hands. And it's quite an interesting one.
It's fun editing that out.
Yeah.
That'd be a good experience working with bleeps. Good learning curve.
Work it out. It's all good.
He was quite a germaphobe, so
Yeah, like was another person as well. Like you'd have like sauce on your hand or something. You go up to him and he'd flinch and freak out. But I'm just thinking personally, like fears of my own. I think one thing for me, like having worked in the same job for a decade, was I guess the fear of trying something different, and that can turn into complacency and fast moving pace of what's going on in the world. You almost have to just learn to adapt and take fear head on.
Yeah, I think that's probably a key point, is that, and again, this is when we're talking about irrational fears, or things that really don't pose a threat, but our body or brain processes them the same way that it processes a very real threat, is the solution is to exposure. Yeah. So an irrational fear, like a fear of, when it's not completely irrational, but it's like, if you really break it down to like what's the worst that could happen when changing a job or something, it's pretty minimal, the overall consequences. But I would be 100% the same. Like if I had to go for a job interview, I'd be extremely nervous and all that. But if you do it lots of times, it will no longer be the fear that it once was. So
it's interesting you said you'd be nervous for a job interview. Isn't nervousness and fear on the same scale, do you think? Do you think being nervous is just a small amount
for the
of
most
fear?
part.
And we just call it
I think
different term.
and when I was probably estimating or when I meant nervous, I meant like I'd be very nervous. I'm not.
It's a scale. It's on the same.
I remember going to a job interview when I was at high school, and like I vomited before I went, and I was that nervous. So I'd still be that. I'd still be exactly the same way today.
Really?
Even though, as I say, the consequences of doing poorly in the job interview are relatively minor. But if I went to lots of job interviews,
It'll become a bit easier over time.
Yeah, exposure therapy.
So I think with most fears, again, when they're not truly life-threatening fears, exposure, the same as like talking to girls or whatever, you're like real scared at first, but if you do it every day, you become desensitized to it because it's not really a huge threat. It's not really a threat at all.
I think an important point that makes sense to me anyway. I don't think you're ever going to get rid of fear. You just have to learn ways to push through it.
It is a survival mechanism. So you're never going to get rid of it. If you got rid of fear, then you'd do stupid stuff like jump off a building because so you'll never get rid of fear because it still serves its purpose when it comes to real threats.
Yeah, it's all about managing your way through it. That's true. That's true. I mean, it's like someone very close to me and many people actually I know, fear of and anxiety of just driving, and they can all drive well, and it'll go just fine just as often as it will for any of us who drive and are not nervous or fearful of it. But
it's probably, is it, when it comes to that, are they like nervous about or fearful of their own driving, or just like being on the road in general?
On the road.
Right, so it's probably actually not an unfounded, we should probably all be a bit more anxious about that, because the roads are pretty dangerous.
Yeah, and when you think about the amount of people that are scared of flying, which is real common.
Which is way less dangerous than driving,
But you just can't help it sometimes.
Yeah, so
it's a real visceral.
When
you're
you're
thinking,
like when you think about it, you should be, again, obviously, if it's debilitating, then it's no good. But you should certainly be hyper alert when you're driving, because literally there's these, 1,000, 2,000 kg.
Bullets.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking, we were talking about the difference between like people having a fear of flying and driving. Do you think it might be perhaps because in terms of flying, they don't really have control over what's going on, whereas if they're behind the wheel or biking for the most part, obviously you have that possibility of someone else crashing into you, or it could next person going past you could be a drunk driver. But for the most part, you have control of the situation.
It probably is that, but that's still, if you break it down, it doesn't matter, because most people probably think they're way better drivers than they actually are. Whereas a pilot is definitely a good pilot because they have to go through rigorous testing. And then there's just the fact that flying is safe because there's not the traffic that there is on the roads.
There's a stat, 92% of people think they're above average drivers.
Yeah, that's probably a low.
I totally fit into
literally
that.
doesn't work.
So
yeah, I'm trying to be a bit more realistic.
It probably does tie into that, where people feel that they're in control, but it's still, if you break it down, that doesn't matter, because for starters, there's other people, you can't control their driving, and even so, even if you can control your driving, you're still human and you're still susceptible to error. And that's the bottom line is, it's far more dangerous to be on the road, even if you're the best driver in the world, than to be in a plane.
Yeah, that's very true. I think, do you have anything to add to that, Nev, before I move on?
No, not really. I was just thinking of a particular quote which I heard about decision making, I guess, the fear of choosing or not to choose or to do something by not doing anything is still a decision by default. So why not at least try something different or overcome that fear, because by choosing not to do it is still the
fear becomes worse, because if you, and I know this is easier than done, because believe me, I'm exactly the same. When I'm scared about something, the easy option is to do nothing. But if you do nothing, then you're just amplifying the fear, because you're essentially saying, well, I'm not capable of doing that, and then it just builds it up in your mind. So if you're scared of going to the job interview and you say, oh, well, I'm just not going to work then, or whatever it may be, it just becomes a bigger and bigger obstacle.
Yeah, that's actually, fear is quite closely related to the risk taking, like we've talked about before. But I like thinking of it like, if you're not changing it, you're choosing it. So in reference to being fearful of something, staying put or digging in, if you're not changing the circumstance, then you've chosen it, essentially. It's still a choice, and it's still a risk in its own way. This kind of related to what I was going to bring up next, in that I think you can liken living in fear or living with fear, like recurring fears, can be much like living with an addiction, in that it's not good for you, but you do nothing about it and keep it. So since you do nothing about it, it just keeps getting worse and cycling, and you go, I know this is irrational, or I know this is blah, 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 but I can't stop myself from feeling this way. And that's just probably should make us have some empathy for people who live with fear, because it is such a visceral reaction, and when it's not a shared fear, it's nearly always irrational to the outside eye. But I think as a method of getting through fear, I really think looking at it as like a separate entity to yourself, like with a scientific mind, and looking at what it's implying about you. Sometimes, because since it is a very visceral gut reaction, it's acting on your subconscious mind. I think we'd all agree. Fear, you don't choose that; it springs up very quickly. and oftentimes things that stem from your subconscious are teachers in many ways. You can learn from them and bring them into your conscious mind, I think. And that helps me. I go, why am I scared about this? And then boil it down.
Well, that's
not so far that to death, but boil it down to like, I'm just afraid of like all my friends leaving. Or
in
like
a general
no
sense
friends,
too, you can also like, I mean, it depends what it is, but find like maybe doing like a pros and cons list. Although that might just sound really cheesy and like dumb, but it can be very helpful because you outweigh like the pros of doing something and not doing it. Well, then you can really, like, you might over-rationalize it, but you're probably going to have more of an informed decision before making, like, before you do what you're going to do.
Yeah. Well, writing down the list is like a physical manifestation of you using your
It's also
your
just
prefrontal
it's a good
cortex
habit or
through it.
good thing to just do in general.
Yeah. Writing things out can always help with many things, but yeah, I think it's like it's a reminder of what your prefrontal cortex said when you get fearful. You can say, "Oh, this is already a pre-done list. I don't have to rethink through it every time you're going to get that fear again." So that's a good one. Never tried it, but also because I'm never afraid.
Yeah, I mean that can be quite general. I think that's easy for small decision-making fears. When it comes to like, I'm trying to think what would be an example of a very big thing to be fearful of.
I think changing job would be like a reasonable one. Like if you write out like what's the risk of changing job and then pros and cons, like that would be one that most adults are going to go through in their life.
Asking a member of the opposite sex out on a date or something.
Yeah,
which is probably realistically one of like the most trivial ones, but it's something that probably 99% of men.
It's just
some if they continue doing it, it becomes like I mean you see these pickup artists or whatever, and that's what they spend. They go out like every day of the week, and they become desensitized to it. But
and so how that brings up a point of like technology making that specific example way easier. Not even to be face to face. You can do it over Messenger or whatever. But technology in general, do you guys have any thoughts about how that relates to people's fears these days? Can technology be used, like with the addiction example I mentioned earlier, to just distract or numb yourself, much like a drug, to just forget about the fears, especially when it's one that's going to be so core to your life as like your job? If you're fearful of leaving your job, you can, I don't know, not dwell on it when you get home from work, because you can just instantly use the technology.
That's sort of like a coping mechanism.
Yes,
but I think technology, and more specifically like social media, it has its tools, it can be a positive thing, but I would argue it's probably now more negative. So for example, in terms of like adolescence, we sort of are in that age bracket where we've had a bit of both. So like just as the internet was coming in, and then as we were getting older, the broadband and technology was improving. So we've had a bit of both. Whereas teenagers, more Gen Z, has sort of just grown into that life of technology and social media. I think now with like TikTok, Instagram specifically, it can just set like such a bad a little spider on the table there. Anyway, it can play like.
Are you scared? Are you fearful?
No, well, maybe a little bit. I don't mind daddy long legs. I can pick them up by their legs, but most other spiders are not really.
If it's not a white
tail. Well, that's true. Anyway, I think what I was trying to say with technology, social media, find teenagers specifically just struggling a lot with making normal decisions, or you're so exposed now, like you're putting yourself out there for everyone to see, and it sort of plays in on your mind, or like you're trying to improve for your peers. You're just exposed too much. So I think in some ways it's good to just sort of take a step back, and it's hard now, because everything you see is just like talked about on Twitter, or
I think it's just like the 24/7 news.
Yeah,
that we can
that's what
get.
I think I'm trying to get with.
The constant exposure doesn't let you, again, I mean, all the social media work on not on your prefrontal thinking mind. It all works on that like reptilian dopamine automatic mind. So the constant exposure to that is just going to hinder your thinking and rational thinking about things even more. And it's exposure on a scale much higher than television news. Yeah, and you're just constantly stimulated with like fear, joy, fear, joy, fear, joy.
Yeah, that's true.
Non-stop on TikTok anyway.
In terms of like personal interaction, I think we're sort of missing a lot of that now. So post-pandemic, we're starting to see, well, I think maybe it's just me, I've sort of noticed even going into like stores or going into the shops, just people seem to be quite cautious of other people around them, which is crazy because, in terms of wearing masks, especially because you lost a lot of that personal interaction. So you can't see like people smiling. It's very hard to interact with people. And I think, as humans, we're built to be around other people.
Yeah. Obviously, it should be.
Yeah, whether that be like in a small tribe or in a bigger scale, like on a society or societal level. We're just built to help each other and be around each other. And so I think it's been quite difficult sort of readjusting back into post-pandemic life.
I guess you realize sometimes, I don't know about you, but you realize how learned some of those social behaviors are, and they're not natural at all.
Yeah.
Like, small talk is learned. Small talk's learned.
So maybe
you're just reciting
segueing off
learned
that
lines. But
do you think that fear can be manipulated onto people?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
No doubt. Yeah, no doubt. I mean, we're not going to say anything revelatory by saying that the last few years has had fear used.
Yeah. And another example would be like 9/11. Like if you looked at the polls or whatever in the days after 9/11, like 90-something% of Americans were keen for war because they were in a rational state of fear.
Yeah.
If you took those polls again now, I would say that at least 70% would say that war was a mistake.
Yeah. It's such a mover, man. It's such a prime mover of the masses and people. It's insane. It can't be understated, probably.
Yeah. So
yeah,
for sure it can be used against people. I think it has been all throughout history. I think every time anyone wants to start a war,
purposely or not, conspiratorially or not.
Purposely or not, but certainly in many cases purposely. I think any time before a war, to start a war, you just get people scared.
Yeah.
So, it's like Germany. Oh, look at these guys, they're a threat to us and blah, 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 and we'll start a war again after 9/11.
Yeah, if we don't get them, they're going to get us.
Yeah, exactly. So, for sure, can be used against people.
Yeah.
No doubt, I would imagine that's what Russia is telling their people at the moment.
Yeah, no doubt. And you couldn't expect them to do anything else.
Really. Yeah, and in fact, I know that because I know NATO is one of the big things that they're upset about. So again, whether those are genuine fears or not, they're certainly using it.
That brings to mind having fear is you're never going to get rid of it, and I actually think I can sometimes think of it, if it's not too overwhelming, as a motivator to learn new things or to see where my gaps in my knowledge are, but fear on that kind of scale, again, I think can be a good thing. Like humans need that narrative of we know fighting for something. They need that purpose that you get from fighting from something. And usually what you're fighting against is something that causes fear, I suppose. Otherwise there's no reason to fight it, whether that's another country or climate change. And there's all fear based things to fight for. So that's a positive thing. I think that that fear, the deep fear, is just co-opted real obviously for trivial stuff like wars, when we could be really banding together.
Yeah, for
getting
sure.
out into space.
Yeah, I think that's probably a really good example. I think if humans collectively could find something to be all on the same team about it. You say something space, like
Yeah.
conquering space, whatever you want to call it, then we could achieve a hell of a lot more.
Yeah. We need a global fear,
Yeah.
which is kind of what COVID was.
Yeah, that's true.
I think that except that the fight against the COVID, the enemy of COVID, that was a global fear, just wasn't directed right.
Yeah, I think maybe at first it was, but then it came down to picking sides and fighting against each other once again.
It missed the mark. It was a good opportunity and completely missed the mark.
Yeah, and as I say, I think probably in the early days it was, unity in general around the world, and then as it dragged on, it became much, more you against me versus them,
Yeah.
Sorry, just had to disappear there for a second.
But yeah, I think actually that's a good point. Like, if there was a sudden threat to Earth, whether it be like an asteroid or an alien attack or whatever it would be, we'd all band together real quick and we'd get stuff done.
This is why I like the grand overarching big main conspiracy at the moment, which I won't go into detail about, but that I think whether it's true or not, it gives people a fight that is going to have good outcomes. I think it's not concerned with race or nationalities. It kind of transcends all those things and is a fight for something good, whether it's true or not. But I think that's a good utilization of fear, because again, that's another fear narrative, like conspiracies.
I think in terms of uniting, having lived through like the earthquakes, we sort of, as a city, sort of just united around that big thing where, you would probably know someone who was dealing with whatever, loss of power, loss of water, and sort of, having like a driver or a motivator, it's beneficial for overcoming those sort of things. On a societal level, when you're talking about war, I think I was listening to a podcast where was Lex Friedman one talking about the Ukraine-Russia war, where he was interviewing most Ukrainians that he'd talked to on the street. Were just saying, he was asking, do you think you're going to win the war? And close to 99% agreed and said yes.
Really?
We're gonna win this war. In terms of like the experts, most people would say, well, no, it's probably unlikely. But when you're like backs against the wall, well, that makes sense. They would have everything to be fearful for. This isn't just soldiers or this is civilian soldiers, people just in general. But despite what you think about the leader, Zelensky, these people fighting this war are so adamant that they're going to win. So I guess, that would be their motivator in terms of like fear. And I guess what you're saying, when
it comes from fear.
And
You're motivated by fear.
We're talking about how we think it boils down to fear of death in the end. Well, that would be like the extreme example.
A very explicit example, yeah. I think fear and motivation, ultimately do go really well together, or are intimately tied. And to a certain extent, in this day and age, I think we kind of have the luxury almost to choose what to be fearful of, and then therefore be motivated by. So I'd say to myself, constant reminder to myself, and if I had to give advice to someone, if someone asked, I'd say just think about it like that and almost pick and choose what you want to be fearful of based off how it motivates you and what the good and bad outcomes of that are going to be, and just choose whichever one's going to elicit the best motivation for you and for everyone around you, or for whatever your values and morals dictate. But most people, that will be helping the people around them and the planet to grow and be healthy.
For me, like if I were to give advice to someone, would be sort of, the saying like out of sight, out of mind. So not in the sense that you would just shy away or not turn away from fear, or do everything to avoid doing a certain thing. But certain things you can kind of just block out of your mind. So like I'm just trying to think of an example. Say you've been with someone like a partner for a good amount of time, and you've just broken up, or they've broken up with you. Not a good idea to stay on social media all the time, right? See what's going on, see them having a good time, or see them in photos, whatever. Blocking that out, so maybe taking a step back, step away from that sort of thing might just help reset. So that's just that's a generic example.
Generic advice, but so generic good on so many levels
totally.
To take a break from that.
But I would say in some ways, you want to surround yourself with people that obviously empathetic to what's going on, or helping you address a certain fear. But in some ways, you just also need to either take it head on or limit your exposure to something.
Yeah, I think probably a better way to put that is focus on what you can control, and the things you can't control, try and block those things out. You can't control certain things, other things you can, so focus on those. And then the things like, an example here would be like the war in Ukraine. We can't change what's happening there. Well, some would argue that we can. So maybe not the best example, but there's things that are out of your control. We can't change like what the government policies are, but you can focus on the choices that you make in life are. So focus on those. Don't be like, oh well, I'm gonna wait until the government changes, or I can't do this because of the government. No, you can't change.
I wrote that down. I think what you're alluding to is like changing the scale of. It's not exactly what you're alluding to, but related. Changing the scale of your thinking to like, is this oftentimes small fear, whether it's a job interview, when you can change the scale of your life, you can look at as if you were looking at your whole life from your deathbed, or if you're looking at national fears. It's harder when it's not directly related to you, but I think changing the whole scale of your thinking can help as well. Especially if it's a fear that's really eating away at you for a long time.
So I think what you're saying then is like think about if it's something really trivial like that. So think about it from the perspective of your deathbed. Am I really gonna go to the grave? Like, would I be worried about this if I had a day to live? Would I be worried about this job? And probably not, right?
Yeah.
So
that's good advice for lots of things as well.
I can think back just in terms of like through study, preparing for a test, and how stressful that makes you feel leading up to it, and losing sleep or whatever. But in the grand scheme of things, looking back from where I am now, it means nothing.
That's another good point. Like, even if I was in high school at that time, taking some bullshit NCEA exam, even if I did take that technique of looking at things from my deathbed, I probably would have still been nervous, because we were led down and told that this was going to have so much impact on the rest of your life. But now we know it didn't. If only we had someone, and that can relate to a lot of things. I think even with it, like the world events, we're only told and led down a very narrow path, so we're not shown a whole perspective, and we can't, if we do think of it that way.
I think that's a really good point. I think school teaches us that the opposite of failure. Teaches us to don't fail. Failure is the worst thing that could happen, when reality you should, in many cases, embrace failure. That's right, because you can learn from it, and then if you embrace it and you're not letting it dictate your life, then you can take risks, try new things. Whereas school is very much don't fail. Take the safest path possible. Don't fail.
Just do what you know you can do, and just capitalize on that, and don't try anything new.
I think that leads you into that mindset where you're constantly worried about it. That's it. Like, it comes to things like exams, they're so trivial in the grand scheme of things. Even if like university exams, like you can do them again and stuff, right? But some people, like if they fail the university exams, like I can just see, like I've seen distraught, like their life is over. But it's like, it's all good. You can do it again next year. It'll suck in the short term, don't get me wrong, but it's not like this is going to dictate your entire life.
Yeah,
like you
yeah.
can get back up on the saddle and go again. It's all good, but I think that stems from that thinking of school teaches you that failure is catastrophic.
Exactly. I think that even from the high school, it's kind of worrying because even from high school, explicitly or implicitly, you're taught that you should just do what you already can do and just capitalize on it. So you're still kind of encouraged to branch out and try new subjects.
I don't think that it's actually terrible advice, but it depends on the context. But I think it's not a bad strategy to focus on. If like for example that you're like this very much depends on what those skills already are. Like say if you're already really good and you're running a business or something, you're really good at that. I don't think it's bad advice to say stick at that if you're enjoying it and it's fruitful. Yeah,
but in terms of fear, it doesn't encourage new novel experiences. That would diminish fears about it.
It doesn't cultivate like a growth mindset.
Yeah, and I would say probably like at that age, it's more like that advice is maybe perhaps better, as I say, once you're already an adult and you're already like you've had years of experimenting. I think that advice would be bad advice at high school where you probably don't really know what you're doing. You haven't really tried many things. So to say stick at this is bad advice at that age, unless you're one of these rare talents. So you just know that you're going to be a lawyer or whatever it may be. You're a musician. When you're younger, I think you should for sure that's when you should be most open-minded and least worried about failure, because the consequences in general are so much less severe when you're younger.
Yeah.
Because you have less responsibility.
Yeah.
And also I think society in general we accept that young people make mistakes and fail. The older you get, the more like society is not very forgiving to like a 40-year-old man with a family for going bankrupt or something, for taking a risk in business, but they would be relatively forgiving of a 20-year-old who did the same thing.
The fear of failure is one that's kind of definitely a learned behavior, because there's nothing implicitly usually bad. I suppose evolutionarily, you were usually failing at something very important, your food or something like that.
And again, probably running the risk of getting cut off from the tribe or whatever. So it probably again does link back to that fear of being essentially left out to dry and die.
We definitely, but I mean, our modern society definitely hasn't encouraged or to change that in any way. It's definitely still failure's not.
And I think that's the problem, is that we're still fearful of things which 100,000 years ago probably would have had fatal consequences, but now they don't. Like even just something like talking to a girl back then, that might have been the difference between your lineage surviving out or not. It's probably not the case, or your like tribe surviving or whatever. That's probably not the case anymore, right? So like
I think we were talking in episode 2 about risk taking.
They're quite closely linked.
They are quite closely related. I think on a societal level, when someone makes a mistake, or someone of prominence, for example, whether it be like a celebrity or well-known figure, it's so easy for the masses to jump on and just shit on this person. Yeah, and I think we do that because that makes us feel better for us not taking those
makes
risks.
us part of the in-group as well.
So
the mob.
It's all like tall poppy syndrome.
Yeah, for sure. So like, if you see someone else failing who's taken a big risk or whatever, they've just started a business and it hasn't gone right, or they've decided to like travel overseas, tried to get a job in a different country and move over there and it hasn't worked out. We love to, in general, we love to like, oh shame, I told you shouldn't have done that. But that's because we probably, and deep down, we want to do something like that, but we're too scared to do it. So
I agree.
It makes us feel good when we see someone else try it and fail, because it's like that. I made the right decision by not doing it.
And also, like the point you bring up as well is, they obviously don't say that the ones that succeed. They don't get a chance to say, I told you so, the ones that do it and succeed because they have succeeded.
Or it can turn into like a jealousy perspective. So
if someone does succeed.
Someone succeeds. We start, this guy's obviously had a leg up this way, or, they got lucky. Yeah, it's like
anything to shift the blame from yourself and the way your life is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that to make you feel better about your circumstances. Yeah,
it's like we kind of see or just dismiss the theory of hard work, where like there will be people who may have benefited. That's probably not a good example, but someone who succeeds and does well in like business, we tend to say like, oh, they might have been a trust fund baby, or they've had like a silver spoon, but it's like, well, behind the scenes you don't really know what's been going on. They could have been putting in 12 hours a day, taking on emails at night time. We only see it once they've got to that pedestal, that it's like, well, look at them, like they've had a leg up or whatever. So I think we need to encourage, and particularly in schooling, bring back like the work ethic. Because I think a lot of people, I was probably one of them, thinking that, you can be whatever you want to be, you can succeed, do whatever you want to do, but you actually do need to put a lot of work and a lot of, your mindset. You take sacrifices. It'd be like someone, I'm thinking of an example you see sometimes on the news, like a young 20-year-old who's been able to buy their first home. And a lot of people will comment, oh, this person's had help from their family, or, if they've been working, like they might not have a life outside of working, they save every penny, but very easy to say, oh, they've had it easy. We kind of just need to look inward. I think looking inward's the best place to go.
I think that just stresses the importance of choosing the correct friends for you, because they're the family that you get to choose, and they're the tribe that you get to choose. So, I mean, it could be kind of unfair to expect the system to teach us all that when...
Yeah, I think, I'm just thinking that probably the reason that we do that also comes back to some sort of primal reasoning to do with like tribe thinking. Like, we don't want other people leaving the tribe because that makes our tribe
especially
weaker.
Successful people, you don't want them leaving.
Yeah,
which is what happens when someone gets successful.
Probably again all does tie back into some sort of primal fear of that does lead back to death. Like, if the successful, the alpha male of the tribe leaves, then what the hell are we gonna do?
Yeah, that's a good point.
So it's much more comfortable if we make sure that the tribe stays put. And you see that like even within like families, like your family can be and
you go, he left us and he's like doing real well overseas somewhere.
And in some cases it may flip back when they are end up being successful, that the family embraces them, but when they were wanting to take the risk, the family, and there's been examples of that in my family, like I said, with my sister becoming a teacher. No, don't do that, it's too risky, you won't enjoy it. Now, they embrace my sister now that she's a successful teacher, but that probably does. There's some like primal pack thing there, is we don't want them
leaving. You don't want a resource gatherer leaving. That makes complete sense.
You were talking about that. I think there's examples of like professional sports people taking on contracts. It's, you start to see the people that linger on and try and like coattail because they would be considered like the alpha of the pack.
For sure, that happens.
Or start saying like, where's my share? I was around when you needed it.
It's real big. I think with Polynesians, they have Polynesian athletes a lot. The family and friends, they expect them to be not just a share, but like lots of it. And I've read stories about Polynesian athletes. Some of them, I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but I'm sure that I've read of Polynesian athletes committing suicide because of like those sort of pressures where family and friends, supposed friends, have essentially bankrupted them because they got a good contract, and then I need, what about your family? What about your bros? And give the money. I've read that. That can be very serious for athletes.
Were you guys fearful or nervous? As we've explained, is just a smaller instance of fear. Were you guys fearful to start the podcast and start releasing this stuff publicly?
100%. I think me personally, like I've always
Fear of the ridicule.
just putting yourself out or exposing yourself. So I remember, like, an example growing up, watching like YouTubers, thinking like, oh man, that would be like the coolest thing to do. And I always thought in my mind like, well, maybe I'll start a YouTube channel and record videos. But there was always that voice or whatever it is. I don't know if it's a voice or something telling you, like, oh, it's a waste of time. Waste of time. You're gonna fail. Like, what's the point of even starting? Or things like that. And yeah, totally. In terms of releasing, like, people have told me personally, like, oh, you've got a good voice for radio. I don't know if I
you do
agree or not.
I said that the first episode.
Yeah, and I was like, well, maybe I should do something with this. If I'm having a few people like tell me specifically, well, that's not an anomaly. That's probably, like, there's something there to it. But it's just that taking that next step and actually, like, I still cringe when I hear like my own voice, or you're talking on a microphone and like a loudspeaker with like a lot of people in the room. But as the more, like David said, the more you do it, the easier it becomes. It's just exposing yourself to it.
I was definitely as well. And just the fear of ridicule was something that I imagine many, many people can relate to. But again, with the whole friends thing, having actual friends that are going to support you and just not going to ridicule you as much or seriously. Or maybe criticism's the right word. Having good friends makes fear easier. Being surrounded by certain people with a certain type of culture makes fear and fear-taking, risk-taking much easier. Yeah.
I also think one thing saying, just, I don't know, before you finish, like Joe Rogan, for example, he doesn't read his comments because, you can't please everybody. So you either listen to the people that care about you the most. There's no point. Like, you can take, I'm not saying don't take criticism or, have that ability to grow or to learn, but ultimately it should be about the people who you care about the most, their opinions of you, your opinion of yourself, and there will always be haters.
That is something, the opinion of yourself is something that I, has become the most, it's become one of the most important things in my life, which sounds real egoistic to say. But in a way, I think it's the opposite, because like with the whole risk taking thing and fears, not utilizing them in a positive way or taking those risks causes your self image. You're basically stabbing yourself in the back, and you can't keep doing that forever. You'll wither yourself down into a husk of like fragility.
Yeah, I don't think that's egotistical at all. I think that's a big sort of trap. I don't know if it's just society in general or if that's a boomer specific thing, but that attitude of don't put yourself first. And I know that can sound like selfish and egotistical, and in certain cases it can be, but when you're talking about, like, as I say, we've talked about this before, setting boundaries and putting yourself first, self-care, self-love, that sort of thing, that's exactly what you should be doing. You shouldn't be, burning yourself into the ground. As I say, I don't know if that's a boomer thing or if that's just a human thing in general.
Thing.
Yeah, I have a feeling it might be a boomer thing. And I think that's a big fast to be sold, because if you can't put yourself first, then that's it. You're gonna burn yourself out. You're never gonna be able to help other people if you're burnt out and feeling like crap about yourself.
It's kind of like when you're on a plane. If the masks come down, like the oxygen mask, they always tell you fix your own before you fix.
Yeah. It's a great analogy.
The person next to you. And I don't think that's an egotistical thing. It's almost like I think Jordan Peterson talking about
that's like cleaning your
room first, because it's a reflection of yourself. So if you clean from the inside, you're more likely to affect people on the out.
Same message in the spiritual community. They always say it all starts from within, as above, so below. You need to, if you sort yourself out, the rest of the world will manifest into harmony as well. But I think definitely it's not egotistical. It's actually, or at least should receive more praise than it does.
Yeah.
I think it's like living according to your conscience, and oftentimes that's not what our modern day encourages, and I think it takes bravery to do.
I think when other people who aren't living that way see someone that is, that pisses them off. Because I think they probably...
If they're unhealthy themselves.
Yeah.
If you're a good friend, if you're a good person, a good friend, you'll encourage that. You'll be
Oh,
like,
yeah,
yes,
yeah,
go,
for
boy,
sure,
go.
for sure. But yeah, I can see that in people who themselves don't put themselves first and don't have that self-care, self-love, boundaries, whatever you want to call it, and they see someone else who does, then they become resentful of that person because I think they can see that that's a good way to live, and they're like, oh no, this person's just selfish, and
It highlights their flaws.
that's a good
It's no way
point.
to live, man. And also, no, you don't want to be friends with those kind of people.
no, definitely not.
No, I think like you're talking about boundaries, for example. I used to find it. Sorry, just ignore my voice. I'm starting to lose it a wee bit. But like saying no is like a cruel thing.
Yeah,
you know?
that's total BS.
and that's completely wrong. I think it's more freeing.
Yeah.
To have more freedom to be actually able to say no.
Yep.
And if someone reacts to that, you say no. Like, well,
you see
that's
that
up to them.
often
Kick them to
happens.
the
Yeah.
curb, they're no good.
That often happens because the other person is selfish because they want you.
Yes.
They want your time. They want a piece of you. That's their selfish desire. They want you. It's like the classic case we talked about with like friends moving overseas. Oh, no, don't go. That's a selfish desire. You're the one being selfish because you want them to stay to please you.
Yes.
So, yeah, it's actually basically the opposite.
I think it is basically the opposite. And I think everyone can relate to being invited to something that could be their best friends, could be real good friends, and you just don't feel like it and feeling obliged. And you say, oh, that's not good enough reason. No one thinks that's a good enough reason themselves. But since everyone's felt that way, I'd say everyone can relate to it. And if you're good friends, you'll say, oh, fair enough, man. You don't need a reason not to want to go grab a coffee today. You're just not feeling it. That's all good.
I used to take it as a personal thing. It took me a long time to grasp and to get over. Is like if you're asking to hang out with someone and they say no, or they've got something on that it was a personal thing against me that they didn't like. They didn't like my company or didn't like my time, and then it was probably the most freeing thing to realize that everyone, especially as you get older, is just so busy. And when you add like now you adding kids to the mix, for example, for some people, it's like they're going to start looking more inward in terms of like a family sense. So their time or their importance or how they justify, like what's more important to them is probably their family. So there'll be just less time in general. So as you get older, you just have to learn like, well, people are busy. Yeah. You make time for those who you can. And like if you were good enough friends, like I know there's a couple friends off the top of my head that if I saw them tomorrow after like 2 years, you would just pick up from where you left off the last time you saw them.
Anyone can tell. It's real obvious.
Yeah,
you
totally.
don't need to test it. I forgot what I was going to say. Damn it.
That's all good. Think about it. But we'll probably have to wrap this one up soon because it's been quite.
What were you saying?
Quite a
about
bit of a
friends?
rant.
So you talking about friends not being able to hang out as they get more responsibilities and not taking that personally. And when you mentioned a freeing feeling from that, maturing and growing up from that, me and David nodding vehemently over here because I think that's real crucial, and possibly a lot of people don't grow up from that ever.
No, definitely not.
Yeah.
And it's
Starting to see that at this age.
Yeah, some
Some
people
are
are
making the transition, others are not.
turning into adults, and you go, and it is freeing, and it feels like growth. It feels really good.
Yeah, well, that's
to
the
be
thing.
like you're doing you, and you have to be comfortable in yourself and know that you're doing the right thing. And I think maybe some people are starting to freak out because they haven't listened to themselves and taken themselves first, and now they end up in a point in life where people are leaving and doing their own thing because they've been working on themselves and starting to be successful and achieving what they want, and freaking out. And that's when you take those things personally.
Well, totally. Like, I'm trying to think of an example, but like growing up, leaving high school, you have like the boys or whatever. So you probably spend a lot of time with the boys. But
The boys!
the boys.
That's real toxic thinking.
That's a toxic thing.
That's
Yeah,
real toxic.
because if one of the boys, for example, meets
Gets a
a
missus.
lady or meets a woman, and they start dating, like you should be happy for this
Yeah,
guy.
but
Like
you're
he's
not.
moving on,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
it's like, oh no, he's
Yeah,
the
oh,
dog
he's
now.
dogging
He's
the boys.
dogging the boys. Yeah.
That's real toxic thinking.
Yeah, that is, and just the boys, it just immediately elicits real tribal, male, testosterone, primitive vibes.
100%.
Yeah, which is fine.
There's
Which is
nothing
fine.
wrong
Everyone
with
needs to
that.
go through that. I think it's important learning point to go through and a fun time. It's definitely
Yeah,
fun.
I think
times
as you're
with the
saying
boys
that-
is
that
always the best.
Some people approaching 30 are still living like that. They
Yes.
still got that same mentality. They haven't outgrown it, and that's
Which is fine. I mean, all
living
kids
for the weekend
Yeah.
with the boys.
Yeah.
Saturdays are for the boys.
Yeah. It's just way better, way more peaceful, I think. And I think we're definitely all agreeing to be past that stage.
100%.
Yeah, well, maybe we need
And then
to
surrounded by people like being surrounded by you guys. I love you guys. Surrounded by you guys who are in the same mindset and supportive. So friends beat fear. Friends over fear.
having people that mean a lot to you or close people and what their thoughts are of you, and
Yeah.
you should take that into account.
Yeah.
And because those are the people that will talk you into it. So family, for example, if you've got a good family, you should be able to go to them and talk about certain things going on, and they might have advice for you. So you take that on board. Friends, family, probably the two closest ones, I would say. I don't know
Well,
where
friends
I'm
of the
going with
family
this.
you don't choose, right? Oh, friends of the family you choose, right? So
Yeah, well,
I think you can have strong bonds, stronger than some family members with friends.
Yeah,
to be the
definitely.
right person.
I don't know
And
where I
it's
was
actually
going with
interesting. Yeah, I was just thinking, I've heard this advice thrown around at I think it actually makes sense. Is sometimes, in fact, the best advice that you can get is actually from a stranger, and that actually makes sense because, and again, it's obviously very dependent on again, right friends and family. This will be all good, but that if you've got that sort of tribal family friends who are don't do it, don't go overseas. The strangers probably, because they don't have that attachment with you, they're going to look at it through like a clear lens, and they're going to, yeah, you should get on that plane. Yeah, that'd be awesome. Go
That is
for
a
it.
good
Whereas
point.
the family's going to, no. Again, dependent on the family.
Depending on the family.
No, don't do that. It's risky. Yeah. So sometimes a complete stranger can again,
Yeah, that's good.
if you do, and
Value the opinions of strangers sometimes more.
yeah, because
than
they don't
more
have
than
any
we do.
biases. They don't have any, all that baggage essentially, which can sometimes,
And-
even if we say that you've got great parents, they can still, or fit friends, we can still be blinded and biased.
Yes, and it does depend on the stranger as well. Also,
Yeah, of course.
Not
I
just
mean, if
being
it's
polite,
like some
if you're saying something
meathead, like you
completely
might
stupid.
get bad advice.
Yes,
Just as a generalization,
No, but that's
sometimes,
good.
a stranger can come at things from a completely clean slate, which say you could have the greatest parents and still they might get it wrong occasionally because they have
Clouded by their love for you. Yeah.
Or if you want to,
Well, yeah, it could come from the best
It
intentions, but like, don't go over,
but
don't
it's
do
very,
that risk. Don't take that risk.
conservative advice. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not the best advice.
Yeah.
But maybe coming from a good place, but it's not great advice because they're blind. They would probably, it's the classic case, if they came across a stranger came to them, they would probably be like, get on the plane or take that job offer or whatever it is. But when it comes to their own family, they're like, oh no, they're much more conservative. In general, again, generalizations here, but
Yeah, I actually think of if I had to give some advice and possibly a good conclusion to deal with fear, possibly, is that ultimately it's always going to come down to you doing something. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. It's going to come down to the individual. But your friends and having good friends and family, and keeping in mind friends can be family that you choose, make that a whole lot easier.
yeah.
And as you said as well, Nav, we're meant to be around people. So when it's good people,
Yeah,
we are good
even as a
ourselves.
natural introvert, like you still need to have time for social gathering. Like we could easily like hermit ourselves into a cave or whatever. Like just ignore what's going on or spend most of your time on the internet. And like it's just not the same talking online as it is meeting and having that face to face contact. But
I hate, anyone who knows me knows I hate talking over Messenger. It's such a
you mean texting or
texting?
Yeah.
It's such a labor for me.
That's
It's
actually
so
an interesting
exhausting.
point because I remember, like, I would hate phone calls, and it was strictly like, no, don't call, just text. But as I've gotten older, it's like, man, it's just easier just to like stop, call, especially when you're trying to organize something. It's like you're back and forth waiting for the next person to reply. It's like 2-minute phone call, sort it out, done.
As fun as texting while
As fun as
driving
texting.
is,
Well,
sometimes it's better to call.
maybe not. We haven't really gone into much of like anxiety as a topic. So maybe we could turn this one into like a 2-part.
Yep.
And
Sounds
so
reasonable.
We'll
Easy,
call this
man.
one part 1 for now.
Easy.
And we might pick up from
Might throw
next
deuces.
time. Yeah.
Yes.
So stay tuned for part 2.
Whoa.
Episode
crap,
6.
the first part 2, guys.
No,
It's going to be epic.
thanks for the chats, boys.
Yeah, it's good.
It's been
Thanks.
fun.
Good counsel.
But yeah, we'll catch you all next time.
Later.
Peace out.
Peace out.
Pieces.